They called it the American dream. Work hard, rise up, and you can own a piece of the world. But for thousands of Black Americans who did exactly that, the dream turned into a nightmare. They built banks, businesses, entire towns. They became millionaires in a world that said they shouldn't even be free. And then, almost overnight, their names, their homes, and their fortunes disappeared. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's a chapter of history buried on purpose. A story of brilliance, betrayal, and resilience. The story of how Black wealth was built, destroyed, and hidden from the world. In the ashes of the Civil War, America stood at a crossroads. Freedom had been won, but equality had not. 4 million people, once enslaved, now found themselves free, but penniless, landless, and facing a society determined to keep them in chains by another name. And yet, out of the oppression, something extraordinary began to grow. Across the South and Midwest, formerly enslaved men and women refused to bow to the weight of history. They became entrepreneurs, educators, and innovators. They built their own schools when white institutions barred them. They started banks when no one would lend them $1. They founded insurance companies, railroads, and newspapers. From the streets of Durham, North Carolina, to Jackson Ward in Virginia, to the heart of Tulsa, Oklahoma, entire Black communities began to rise, self-sufficient, confident, and prosperous. They were living proof that Black Americans could succeed not in spite of the system, but beyond it. In Tulsa, one community would become a legend, Greenwood, known as Black Wall Street. It was the early 1900s, and the oil boom had turned Oklahoma into a new frontier of opportunity. In Greenwood, Black entrepreneurs seized that chance. They built luxury hotels, movie theaters, grocery stores, law firms, and hospitals, all owned and operated by Black citizens. The dollar circulated dozens of times before it left the community. Doctors lived beside teachers, lawyers beside shop owners. There were over 600 businesses in a 35-block radius. And it wasn't just Tulsa. There were more than 60 Black towns across America thriving during the same period, each a monument to resilience and ambition. In an age when white politicians preached segregation, these communities quietly declared independence. But prosperity made them visible. And visibility in a racist nation was dangerous. By 1910, the South was a powder keg. Jim Crow laws legalized segregation. Lynchings terrorized entire towns. Yet Black wealth kept rising, and that terrified those who depended on inequality to maintain power. White newspapers began publishing articles warning of Negro arrogance. Politicians claimed that Black progress would lead to chaos. In truth, the chaos they feared was equality. When white men saw Black millionaires driving cars, wearing fine suits, and owning property downtown, when they saw a world where a Black man could hire a white worker, the illusion of white superiority began to crack. And for those built on hate, that crack was unbearable. The hostility grew quietly at first. Boycotts, threats, laws designed to choke off growth. Banks denied loans. Insurance companies refused coverage, but the success continued. Then, in 1898, in Wilmington, North Carolina, the backlash turned violent. Wilmington was a rare southern city where Black citizens held political power. They ran businesses, owned newspapers, and even held public office. It was a thriving, multiracial democracy, until white supremacists decided to take it back by force. A mob of 2,000 armed men overthrew the elected government, burned the city's Black newspaper, and murdered dozens of Black residents. The rest fled for their lives. It was the only successful coup d'etat in American history, and it worked. The story was erased from textbooks for over a century, but the message was clear. Black success would be met with white rage, And no place would feel that more than Greenwood, Tulsa. It began, as so many tragedies do, with a lie. In May 1921, a young black man named Dick Rowland, a shoe shiner, entered an elevator in downtown Tulsa. A white girl screamed. Rumors spread that Rowland had assaulted her. He hadn't, but truth rarely mattered when lies were more convenient. By evening, white mobs gathered outside the courthouse, demanding that Rowland be lynched. Black war veterans from Greenwood, many of them World War I heroes, arrived to protect him. They had fought for democracy abroad, and now they were fighting for justice at home. Then came the gunfire. Overnight, the city turned into a war zone. White mobs, aided by police and even the National Guard, stormed Greenwood. Machine guns were mounted on trucks. Planes dropped incendiary bombs on homes and businesses. Entire city blocks were engulfed in flames. Black families fled as their houses burned behind them. Some were shot in the streets, others were captured and forced into detention camps. By dawn, more than 1,200 homes were destroyed. Hospitals, libraries, churches, all reduced to ashes. The Red Cross called it one of the worst domestic disasters in U.S. history. But what happened after the fire was even more chilling. Insurance companies refused to pay claims. Banks claimed loan defaults. City officials rezoned the land to prevent rebuilding. Property deeds vanished. Court records disappeared. What had been one of the richest black communities in America was erased, economically, physically, and historically. For decades, silence settled over Tulsa like smoke that never cleared. Survivors were told not to speak. Newspapers omitted the event. Schools never mentioned it. And yet, buried beneath the ashes, pieces of truth remained. In the 1990s, researchers began uncovering what really happened. They found insurance records, family photographs, and eyewitness accounts that told a story far bigger than a riot. It wasn't a riot at all. It was a massacre. A coordinated effort to destroy black wealth at its peak. Families who had once been millionaires, owning real estate, stocks, and oil rights, were left destitute. And Tulsa was not alone. In Rosewood, Florida, a similar massacre occurred in 1923 after another false accusation. The entire town was burned to the ground. Survivors fled into swamps. Their land, thousands of acres, was seized and resold. In Ocoee, Florida, Election Day violence drove out every black resident. The land they left behind would later become worth billions in real estate value. And in Forsyth County, Georgia, white mobs expelled more than 1,000 black residents, claiming their farms and homes. These were not isolated events. They were patterns. Patterns of theft disguised as justice. After the violence, the rewriting began. History books labeled the massacres as riots. Officials destroyed police records and court files. Newspapers altered headlines. Black survivors who tried to rebuild were met with endless bureaucracy and open threats. Many never returned. When their descendants later tried to reclaim the lost land, they discovered deeds missing, archives accidentally destroyed, and government agencies unwilling to help. Economists have estimated that the destruction of Tulsa's Black Wall Street alone robbed black Americans of over $200 million in today's money. If you include all the black towns burned and properties seized across the South, the loss climbs into the billions. And that gap didn't just vanish, it compounded. Generations later, those stolen millions became the foundation of white wealth in America. New neighborhoods, banks, and corporations built on land taken from massacred families. The victims' descendants inherited nothing but silence. But history has a way of refusing to die. In the early 21st century, as descendants began tracing their ancestry, new evidence emerged. Archaeologists unearthed unmarked graves. Investigative journalists found property deeds showing black ownership of prime downtown land. Court petitions were filed, demanding reparations, not as charity, but as repayment for theft. And slowly, the world began to listen. In 2021, the last known survivors of the Tulsa massacre, aged over 100, testified before Congress. Their voices trembled, but their message was clear. We built this. They destroyed it. And for a century, America tried to pretend it never happened. Their testimony reignited a national reckoning. Documentaries, books, and memorials began uncovering the full scale of what was lost. But perhaps the most powerful discovery wasn't just the land or the money. It was the truth. For the first time, America was forced to see that black poverty didn't happen by chance. It was engineered. And black wealth wasn't rare. It was systematically erased. Imagine for a moment if Greenwood had survived. If those 600 businesses had grown through the 20th century. If their wealth had been passed down, invested, expanded. Economists say that by now, black Americans could have owned trillions more in generational wealth. The racial wealth gap, the same one often blamed on laziness or lack of education, would barely exist. Instead, that gap is one of the deepest in the modern world, not because black communities failed, but because their success was deliberately destroyed. And yet, even in the face of centuries of erasure, the spirit of Greenwood lives on. From Atlanta to Detroit, from Chicago to Houston, new generations of black entrepreneurs are rebuilding. They are creating tech companies, investment firms, and global brands, reviving the same ambition that once defined Black Wall Street. Because the greatest revenge against erasure is legacy. The destruction of black wealth wasn't limited to America. Across Africa and the Caribbean, similar tactics were used. European empires extracted resources, erased local economies, and replaced thriving civilizations with debt and dependency. In the Congo, Belgium's King Leopold II amassed a fortune from rubber and ivory, while killing millions. In Nigeria, the British dismantled flourishing Yoruba and Igbo trade systems to monopolize palm oil and tin exports. In Haiti, after gaining independence, France forced the nation to pay reparations to former slave owners, over $21 billion in today's money. That debt crippled Haiti for generations, turning the world's first black republic into one of the poorest nations on earth. The story was the same everywhere. Whenever black people created wealth, the system found a way to destroy it, or take it. But the revelation today is this: those stories can no longer be buried. Historians are digitizing archives once thought lost. Descendants are suing for restitution. Technology is restoring names and faces erased from history. And through this rediscovery, a new truth is emerging. That black excellence was never the exception. It was the foundation. Long before the world acknowledged them, there were black millionaires, black inventors, black empires. From Mansa Musa, the richest man who ever lived, to Madam C.J. Walker, America's first self-made female millionaire, black wealth is not a new story. The tragedy is that each generation was forced to start over, again and again, because their prosperity was stolen, buried, and renamed. So what do we do with this truth? We remember, we rebuild, we teach. Because the greatest weapon of oppression was never violence, it was erasure. If people forget what was stolen, they stop asking to get it back. But once the truth is known, silence loses its power. The story of how black millionaires' wealth was destroyed and hidden isn't just a tragedy. It's a warning, a reminder that progress without protection can be undone overnight. Yet it's also a story of defiance, because every time the world burned their houses, they rebuilt. Every time they were silenced, they wrote again. Every time they were erased, they returned through the voices of their descendants. That is the power of memory. That is the legacy of those who refused to vanish. History is not just written by the victors, It's also buried by them. But the truth has a way of rising. Greenwood may have burned, rosewood may have fallen, but their ashes became seeds. And those seeds are growing again, through every black business owner, every historian digging through forgotten archives, every storyteller refusing to let history stay hidden. Because, in the end, wealth isn't just money. It's memory, culture, and courage. And as long as we remember the truth, they can never take that away again. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it, keep these names alive. Because history doesn't belong to those who hide it. It belongs to those who uncover it. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth they tried to erase.